mortgage banking operations in the United States of America because they were engaged in a home loan mortgage fraud where they bought people's interest rates up so they could take kickbacks. And you ended up paying those higher interest rates for 15 or 30 years, depending on the term of your mortgage. We exposed that, and many of those schemes were actually those which brought down our economy in 2008. So I know how to fight, but you have to do it with an eye towards how are you going to bring this all together for folks? How are you going to resolve it? And that's what they've lost in Washington, D.C. The other thing that I thought, who might be able to beat David Perdue and who would be a better leader? I've been involved in government since I was 8 years old. My best friend's dad was a Georgia state legislator, and he used to take us around to events such as this. So while other kids were at parties or parks or doing all the wonderful things that kids do, we went to events such as this. And I learned to love government. I learned to love what representative government was all about. I always kept an eye on it, ended up majoring in government and economics when I was in college, became a lawyer because I loved government and the role of the courts and the opportunity to fight bullies and to achieve justice for people. And so I've lived my whole life being very involved in politics because it matters. Government touches your life every single day. It's the framework through which we live our most prosperous life. Government is a tool for solution. It is not a weapon to divide us and pit us against each other. And those that would do so are after governmental positions only for the power, not for the service. And frankly, they don't deserve the honor. And that's the decisions that we have to make. The last thing I want to tell you about why I decided to run for this particular seat is because I'm an 8th generation Georgian. My mother grew up in South Georgia, in Moultrie, Georgia, in fact. I have family throughout Pavo, Doe Run, Thomasville, Brooks County, all over that area of South Georgia and in Central Georgia. Of course, I actually was born and raised in Atlanta. Yes, and I went to Chamblee High School, public school there, went to law school in Atlanta, at Emory University Law School, and practiced law in Atlanta. So I know what it's like to live in the great metro Atlanta area and the complexity of that area and what it does as a work engine for this state. But I've spent the last 24 years in Columbus, Georgia, having the great privilege to be mayor for 2 terms. And I also know the plight and the journey of folks who live in Central and South Georgia. And so when I started to assess all of that information, I thought if we had an experienced woman, and that's important, particularly in the 2020 cycle, who knows how to run, who knows how to win, who knows how to lead, and knows how to govern, Senator Perdue's in trouble. And I'll tell you another reason he's in trouble is because the reason why Republicans have been winning since our last statewide office in Roy Barnes, when Sonny Perdue beat Roy Barnes, is something called the rural strategy. And some people call it the Paul Coverdale strategy. And you see, the Republicans figured out that the demographics of this state were changing. That Georgia was becoming very dense in its population, particularly in the metro Atlanta area, but in Augusta and in Savannah and in Macon and in Columbus. So the urbanized areas were getting pretty thick with population. And they were largely Democratic. And they knew they were in trouble if they didn't come up with a strategy. So the rural strategy, the Paul Coverdale strategy, is that they have to run the tables in all the other counties. They have to get 75%, 80%, 68% of the vote in those other counties. That's why when we have these elections, particularly in 2018, you went to bed at night at 10:30 and we were winning by 200,000 votes, and you woke up and we lost by 53,000 votes. It's because those rural votes were coming in. And they were winning by 16,000 votes, 38,000 votes, 69,000 votes. You think that doesn't matter when DeKalb County is turning out hundreds of thousands of votes. But when you start aggregating all of those different counties, squeaks by us. Squeaks by us. But you run a candidate who has good name recognition in Central and South Georgia and has a solid reputation of being able to govern, like I believe I do, having come out of the Columbus area for all these years and stand standing on my record, and it makes that rural Georgia strategy, that Paul Coverdale strategy, completely ineffective. And here you are in Columbia County. I know you think, well, we're 66% red. You went 66% for Kent the last time around. You don't have to go to 49% red. You don't have to go to 50% red. You just need to shave 3, 4, 5 percentage points off of that. And if that's replicated in other counties throughout Central and South Georgia, it's a landslide. Seriously, because you know Atlanta and these urbanized areas are going to come out. They're going to be landslides. They're going to be returning 60%, 62%, 63% in some of these areas. We start shaving 3, 4, 5% where they're used to running the tables, and it's a real problem. So this is doable, folks. This is doable. Let me tell you just a couple of quick things about why particularly Mr. Perdue is vulnerable. Not only because of the dysfunction, I have to tell you that's going to be the single biggest issue in this election, the instability and people's exhaustion with the instability. But the fact that he's failed on the major tenets he went up there to do for Georgia. He said he was going to reform the budget. Now I know a little something about reforming the budget, but I know this. Our budget deficit is $1 trillion today. The Office of Management and Budget tells us that's 3 times what it would have been if they not passed the ill-targeted tax cut they did. We know that our trade deficit is $891 million, the largest it's ever been in the history of the United States. We know that our national debt is $22 trillion. If he's reforming the budget, he's running in the wrong direction. He's completely failed on that major tenet that he set forth as the measuring mark of whether or not he would be successful. They have declared tariff wars on our farmers. Now they declared tariff wars on our auto industry here, the Kia plant, which is in central Georgia there, just north of Columbus. That's going to affect us. It's going to affect our port that we've just paid all of this money to deal with, this tariff war. We waited 235 days to get relief for Hurricane Michael support. One of the things we've never fought about in this country, when citizens have been in need, our federal government has responded. We have never left our folks out there in the devastation and in the cold without support from our federal government. 235 days. First, Senator Perdue voted against it the first time it came up. It came up as a package for Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Harvey, and Hurricane Maria relief. He voted no. I will tell you that the Albany paper had a headline that said, Georgia not on Senator Perdue's mind. Because the first time it came up, he voted no. Then they went into the ego battle of shutting down the government. And we lost the opportunity to get that Hurricane Michael relief for Georgia. Then they got into the battle of arguing whether Puerto Ricans are actually U.S. citizens or not. I mean, you know, we learned that in the 5th grade, folks, but that's okay. That's okay. And then we get into the argument of whether or not they can take Hurricane Maria and Irma monies from Puerto Rico and shift it to build the wall. And all the time, our farmers are being held hostage because they're addicted to the fight. They're not looking for a solution. So I want to tell you something. From my time as being a trial lawyer, from pulling victory from the jaws of defeat more times than I can count, from solving the completely unsolvable, as both the mayor when we reformed our pension plan, and nobody thought we could do it. When we reformed our health care plan, but instead we thought we were going to have to lay off folks, and we never did. We got a health and wellness center. We bettered their benefit, and we saved millions of dollars for our taxpayers. When you thought it couldn't be done, somehow miraculously it happens when you have a strategic mind and you have good folks standing ready, willing, and able to row with you in the same direction for better government and for having the best right thing happen. That's leadership. So when you have the right leadership, amazing things happen. You can solve the unsolvable. You can pull victory from the jaws of defeat. Anything is possible, even a functional and visionary U.S. Senate. It's possible, folks. We can do this, but it's going to matter who you elect to put in that office. And that's why I'm running for U.S. Senate. I am so glad to be here with you tonight. I want to answer your questions, but I want to tell you a couple things very quickly. We've got materials here. I hope you will take it with you because there's all sorts of things in there that I'm not rattling off to you tonight. And one thing you'll see is that I have a national security secret clearance. I've worked with 5 of the greatest generals the Army has. I know what it means to have to stand in support of our families when they have members that are being deployed. I know what it means when people are retiring out of the military and we are trying to find them civilian jobs. I know what it means when you have a large segment of your population that's veterans and the veterans' healthcare system isn't working for them like it should. I know what it means when they start thinking about base realignment and closure up in Washington, D.C. to your community and how your community is going to grow and what our readiness is in this country. I know what sequester does to the military. That's why I have a security clearance. That's why I've been briefed with Johnny Isakson and Senator Chambliss and Congressman Senator Bishop and 5 of the greatest generals that the Army has ever produced. So my experience is deep and it is wide. And I intend to talk about it for the next 17 months. We're going to take this seat, folks. So take some information. You've got the window decals there. I've put them out because if you will put that on your rear window of your car, that's as good as a $1,000 contribution for advertisement to this campaign. And I appreciate it. But don't let that deter you from making a generous contribution. Seriously, thank you all so much. You are going to be pivotal in this election, just like so many counties in Central and South Georgia. I'm so appreciative of you. We're going to need you to knock on the doors. We're going to need you to spread the word today. Those of you who do social media, you need to help us out there saying, you've seen and you've heard what's possible, right? We're going to need you to volunteer at teresatomlinson.com. We're going to need your organization, Reverend Jessica, to help us out. But we're going to get it done. The Senate race is going to be at the top of the ticket, and I'm so excited about that because with an exciting race at the top of the ticket, Georgia's going to be instrumental in what happens in the presidential race. So thank you all so very much for giving me some of your attention tonight, and I would love to answer some questions.
The question I've got is, if we look at the election that John Ossoff lost and the one that Stacey lost, what lessons can we learn from that?
Well, a couple things. I would say that those are really very different, actually, for a lot of reasons. One, the John Ossoff race was part of that transformation and reaction to Trump having been elected. But you know, Lucy McBath came back and won that race with much less money the next time around. I think a lot because of the ground that had been tilled that made it ready and right, and because Lucy McBath is a fabulous candidate. If you hadn't had the opportunity to meet her and to hear her, she is. I think the lessons from both John Ossoff, Lucy McBath, and Stacey Abrams, although 2 of the 3 were not the results that we wanted as Democrats and citizens, is that Georgia's much closer to being blue than we ever imagined it was. Those seats should not have been in play like that by any estimation of the numbers leading into 2017 for John Ossoff and 2018 for Stacey Abrams. And so I think what you see is an unease with the Republican agenda, with the abuse of power that's going on at various levels, both at the state. I think the failed policies of what government is supposed to do, what it's all about. And so you see people coming out in constituencies that frankly were ambivalent and maybe fairly comfortable with the Republican Party saying, this is not my group, this is not my crowd, and coming over. Stacey Abrams actually carried the suburban voters much more than anyone thought she would, and most people, when they're, in retrospect, kind of analyzing that race, they kind of leave that out. That's where her delta came from, is those races. So I would say the lessons we learned is that we're much closer than we think we are. I think we learned about some of the systemic suppression that was going on, where maybe we thought they were one-offs, you know? We heard about things, right? We heard about absentee ballots being thrown out, and you just thought, well, that's such and such county. You know, who knows what happened down there, something crazy. And then we saw it with our own eyes happening all over the state. We got orders in the days before the 2018 election. Those court orders, a lot of them couldn't be effectuated because it's just so much of the election had already taken place with early voting, right? And some of them were just incapable of getting the message out to all 159 county registrars about how to do things. But now those orders are still in place, and there's still lawsuits going out, and more orders coming. We were able to shame the Republican leadership into making some fairly mediocre or milquetoast legislative changes in the integrity of our system. But there's some changes, some positive changes in there nonetheless, and that's helpful to us. And I think the great sanitizer of sunlight has been turned on this issue in the state. The national media is watching, federal law enforcement's watching, the citizens are watching, and the candidates are watching. There's been many, not just Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams organizations, but many nonprofit organizations that have popped up. Their raison d'etre is to look at various different aspects of the suppression that has been going on in Georgia. So have faith. I know, have faith. 53,000 votes is amazing, that difference. It was usually more like 250,000 vote delta. Made up a lot of ground. And now with the improvements with the, fighting the suppression, and I'm serious about this. I know obviously I'm a candidate, so it's self-promotion. But by fielding a formidable candidate with name recognition, reputation in Central and South Georgia, it really hurts that rural strategy. We have a serious chance this time. So thank you. Yes, sir.
My wife and I both grew up in Moultrie, so I had planned to vote for you.
Oh, and that's how my parents met. My dad was at Moody's.
But
Yeah.
I had just a couple of quick questions.
Yes.
One is, some of us work, a lot of us in here work for Stacey Abrams and went out and canvassed and made phone calls and door to door and that type of thing. And I'd like, I think we'd like to, or I was speaking for myself, I don't mind knocking on doors and doing that kind of thing.
Makes a difference.
But what I'm wondering is, she had a pretty good database of names and all. Do you have access
Yes.
to any of that?
Yes, those were largely done by organizations that are all affiliated with the Democratic Party, and in fact affiliated with an organization that our campaign manager has worked with for many, many years. So our team is very connected to all of those resources you're referring to.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I wondered if you could comment, health care is a big
Yes,
issue
thank
for
you.
a lot of people. And there's really two, I guess, approaches to universal health care. One is to fix the Affordable Care Act, and
Yeah.
one Medicare for all. And I was wondering what your feelings are on
Yeah,
that.
I have a strong and unequivocal support for universal health care. I do believe that we can broaden Medicare, perhaps to 55. And I think, and there's actually been studies done, and Hillary Clinton had proposed that, and in fact, it's part of Bernie's speech now, is to first take it to 55. So taking it to 55, increasing Medicaid to 130% of poverty instead of its current level, so getting more people in need. And then putting Medicare on the exchange as an option and making the private market compete with it. And if it can't compete with it, then people have that option. But for the 160 million citizens that have private employer health care, allowing them the opportunity to keep the plans that they feel comfortable with. Now, again, I think that, it's going to be very interesting to see how the private market competes with having Medicare on the exchange. But I think that if you expand Medicare, if you put Medicare on the private, the costliest participants out of the think will work more efficiently than it presently does, because the healthcare industry is not a healthy, participating, free market right now. It is filled with anomalies, barriers to entry, super profits, looting, disparity of information, lack of bargaining power. There's nothing, no indicia of a free market presently in our healthcare system. So we have to adjust that, and I think we can through providing a universal healthcare system.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, but one of the, Senator Sanders has a legislation in now.
Yes, he does.
That would be, as I understand it, would replace and take
Everything.
away, and replace everything and put it on
Yeah.
Medicare, which I think will end up being a loser for
Yeah,
us.
well, I think a couple things. First of all, I'm not afraid of anybody's idea, throw it on the table. I don't wanna stop people from brainstorming. But I do think that the shock to our system would be devastating to our healthcare providers and to the system. What is working about our system, I think, could really be thrown in a loop. When we can provide, when you ask people, what's bothering you about our current healthcare system, it's that people aren't covered. The 25-year-olds and 26-year-old kids can't get covered. So now they can stay on our policies, the parents' policies, the pre-existing conditions. All these various things that the private market, left to their own devices, won't cover, right? Or at least in any way that you can afford it. So you're right. If we go to single payer, a Medicare for all, which I understand people's excitement about it because they want to achieve what I'm talking about as quickly as possible. But I'm with you. I'm afraid that if we go to single payer and quote Medicare for all in one fell swoop, it will be so disruptive to the market, economically and to the industry, that we literally will continue to be fighting about this 15 years from now with no resolution. Remember, I said I'm a fighter, but with an objective to solve it, and that's the solution. And I always say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you expand Medicare, you put it on the exchange, you expand Medicaid, and then you see how the private market reacts to that. And there's actually some Republican support for many and all of what I've just said. So, yeah, thank you. And we had a couple of other ones, and then I want to get over here too. So somebody? Yes, ma'am, and then we'll go over here. Yes.
I have a question that everybody else may think is crazy, but it really bothers me on the abortion issue and the bills coming out.
Yes.
And in Georgia, it's a heartbeat
Yes.
bill. Why is it that the male is not accountable for anything?
Best question I've ever heard.
I know. Let me say, this is something I'm so passionate about. Let me say, and people always tell me that when I talk about the abortion issue, I don't talk about it like anyone they've ever heard before. They say, you're not talking off of Democrat talking points. And I say, no, because I'm talking about it like this. First of all, anybody's bodily autonomy is an essential right of freedom and equality guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution. Your bodily autonomy is the most precious and singular thing you have. And why we're letting government, I want the libertarians and the small government conservatives come out here and join us in this outrage, just on that point alone. And the other thing that I do when I talk about abortion that a lot of people have never heard before is I talk about it from my faith tradition. And that is that women are divinely made. They are divinely made to carry any life they have within the walls of their flesh, living off their lifeblood. And by God, our Creator meant for women to be the sole fiduciary of any life that they're carrying. And nowhere in the Bible or any religious text that I have ever seen does it delegate that fiduciary duty to a secular legislative body. Period. I don't know why, some folks in the evangelical community are supporting this. When we've been divinely made, we can see what that means. Why are we, and then the fact that we're using a secular government to try and bring the kingdom of God to earth is just, clarify that. So it doesn't make any sense on so many levels. I understand it's so emotional. That's why it's an individual issue. That's why it's inappropriate for governmental legislation. So make your choice. Make your choice, right? But not the government to decree. Thank you for asking a difficult question. I enjoy the difficult ones. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My question is, I know you're running for federal office, but
Yes.
in the state, the conflict of interest at the governor's level about the voting machines.
Yes.
And the rural area getting the training on the new ones or the old ones, either way.
Mm-hmm.
How will those machines get out there? Which way we're gonna go with this?
Yeah.
Because it still hasn't been resolved. They keep pushing it back, but not letting us know what's going on.
Yeah, well, I will tell you a couple things. First of all, you are touching on some federal issues, okay, so I want to talk about that. But there is a lawsuit pending in federal court that says that the voting machines that have been chosen by our state legislature and signed by the governor may not be compliant with federal law. So that is still out. That's still a question that is being reviewed. So don't give up hope, okay? Don't give up hope. And I would say that, as I said before, there's so many eyes watching this particular issue that even if somehow we don't get the voting machines as Democrats we believe we need, and frankly a lot of conservatives are saying that we need, with having an actual paper trail, you know, that we may have some protections that will save us from what happened before. So I would just say, I understand sometimes I wake up and it looks pretty gloomy too, but don't lose hope yet. The other thing is, as a United States Senator, I can propose and support legislation that applies the Voting Rights Act to all 50 states. When I was talking before about them being addicted to the fight and not wanting to get a solution, you know, one of the reasons that the Voting Rights Act actually got thrown out by the United States Supreme Court is because they had written opinions. Other courts and Supreme Court had written opinions for years saying, y'all got to do something about the Voting Rights Act. You need to look at it, because the way it was originally written, it had so many states from the South, right, that had a history, a troublesome history. And they kept saying, you know, why those states and not these other states? So I say, to heck with that. It should apply to all 50 states. Right. What are we even talking about? If you're a United States citizen, you've got one man, one vote. And I don't care if you live in Nebraska, where they're marginalizing and disenfranchising Native American Indians, or if you're a United States citizen by birth who happens to be of Hispanic descent and you live in Oklahoma, or you live in some, and they're making you go 13, 15 miles to vote, and there's no public transportation system.
Right. Just like in Kansas.
Exactly, yeah, in Kansas. You know, all over this is happening. So if you live in the United States of America, anywhere in our 50 states, you should have the protection of the Voting Rights Act, and you should have the access to pre-clearance by the Justice Department. And there should be broad support for that. And that's how the federal government and the federal jurisdiction can affect what's going on in Georgia. And I'm telling you, if we had had those protections before, we wouldn't have had the debacle we had in 2018. Okay? Yes, sir.
Both the UN and the United States Pentagon have both identified climate change as the #1 threat to national and international security. Mm-hmm. As Senator, what would you propose to address that specifically? Would you advocate a carbon tax?
Yeah, I would say we have to do something. First of all, we owe Al Gore and Jimmy Carter a huge apology. Let's just fess up right now, and particularly the Republicans owe Al Gore a huge apology, because climate change is real. We had some luxury of time, if you go back to the 70s, if you go certainly back to the 90s, where we could have made the changes and affect climate change in a more gradual way. And now, because the Republicans didn't want to listen to science and fact and scientists telling us these, quote, inconvenient truths, we have less time. And so we have much less time, and so the answers have to be more drastic. You're asking me about carrot versus stick. I said carrot and stick, you know, and let's see what we can figure out, because frankly, the livelihood of the businesses that would be affected are in imminent peril without addressing climate change. I can tell you, you think, well, gee, I don't want to pay for it. Honey, you're already paying for it. I mean, you know, in Columbus, Georgia, we're talking now about having to completely change the size of our stormwater sewer system pipes, because we're having 100-year floods at a clip we've never had them before. Our stormwater, I'm just talking about stormwater sewer system. I'm not talking about the roads that are collapsing because the aquifers are drying up or because they're blowing up. That's happening all over, you know, this country. I'm not talking about the land that Savannah's losing. I'm not talking about the fact that Miami's sinking. I mean, there's real things going on. The fact that Manhattan may be underwater if it continues at the current rate. These are not fantastical assumptions anymore. These are things that are fairly imminent, that we already are enduring, and we're going to be enduring them to a much more severe, degree. And so what needs to be done? Whatever needs to be done to reverse this course.
Are you on board with the new Green Deal?
I cannot say that I am 100% on board with the new Green Deal, because it is only a policy proposal. As you well know, it does not flesh out the details. I would be very aggressive about how we're going to get to our carbon mark for 2030, which is right around the corner.
It has the potential to be an economic boom too,
yeah,
though.
but it could. You're right. It's about, you know, people just see it from one side. They're like, wow, you're going to completely change this industry over here, but you're going to create a whole new industry over here. And we can do it. I said before, I think we were talking about single payer. And I said, I don't fear anybody's idea. Throw it on the table. But I know we can figure it out. And there's going to be some pain. There's going to be some pain. But I know it's urgent.
It's going to be a much worse pain.
It's going to be a much worse pain. It really is. It already is. Yes, sir, in the back.
Sounds like you're very much on board as far as a budget management type
Yes.
individual. What have you thought about in terms of how you're going to pay for Medicare for all?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, remember I just said I didn't support Medicare for all.
Well, I thought you said you did.
No, sir. I said I supported universal health care by expanding Medicare to 55. And
okay, how you
yes,
gonna,
right. Well, there's actually studies, sir, that show how that is paid for. It's actually paid for by the fact that it reduces the cost of private premiums. It reduces the cost of uninsured premiums, or uninsured costs, which you're paying for right now, because there's millions of people that don't have health care coverage. There's people who aren't getting basic maintenance, so they don't go in to get their insulin, they don't go in to get their cholesterol reducing drugs. They wait until they have a stroke, and then you're paying for them because they're uninsured. That's the most inefficient way to run a market. So I hear what you're saying, but it actually can be paid for, and there are studies from the Congressional Research Agency, legitimate, nonpartisan studies that show.
I'm not seeing that yet.
What's that?
I'm not seeing that yet. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it is. Just if you go and Google when you get home, go and Google expand Medicare to 55 and look at it. And look at we can actually do it largely under the administrative cost we've got right now. Adding Medicare to the exchange is, there would be some administrative cost associated with that, but it would be paid for by the monies being used to buy it on the exchange. Instead of you going to Anthem, instead of you going to Blue Cross Blue Shield, instead of you going to Humana, you would buy the Medicare option because it was cheaper. So you would be paying those premiums and paying for your insurance just as you were if you were going to Anthem.
So the Medicare that's on the marketplace is going to be subsidized by all of us taxpayers. So then somebody else.
And it's also going to be subsidized by the person paying the premium.
But most of it's going to be coming from us, the taxpayer.
No, not when it's on the exchange now. Some of it will be, but it's going to be the fact that Medicare will be subsidized by some of the taxpayer money, which you're talking about, is stuff you're already paying for when the government's picking up the dole because private funds aren't paying for people's unpaid emergency room bills and their ICU bills.
Amen.
It's not being paid for now. The government's picking that up. The government's picking that up through indigent care. Columbus, Georgia paid $24 million a year in indigent care. If we had a universal health care system, Columbus, Georgia would save $24 million a year. That's one city. That's one city. And imagine what the premiums would do if you were taking people, 55-year-olds, as compared in the market right now. When you're 65, you go on Medicare, right? If we expand Medicare to 55, those are the oldest people in the market, 55 to 65. You put them on Medicare, think about what the free market has just gotten out of that. You've just removed the costliest people from the free market. Now they've got less risk, and what can they do? Reduce their premiums. That's how it works. Because let me tell you, I will say that our conservative friends think that a free market is anarchy, and it's not. A free market's only free because the government is participating as a partner. A government is creating the framework in which the free market can actually function efficiently. And there's no place that's better demonstrated than in healthcare. And we've refused to take the potential public-private partnerships at our immediate disposal and exercise them because of ideology and infighting and pitting us against one another when the solutions are right in front of our face. And so we have to stop this, my pure ideology is all I want to talk about, and start looking at the solutions. And what I'm suggesting to you is a pragmatic, step-by-step solution that we can stop and see where it is and what the market effects are. Yes, sir. I didn't hear that. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, my question is kind of piggybacking off the voting machines again, but from a different perspective. In hindsight of the 2016 election and 2018, an investigation that ensued, it was determined that at least one state election system had been compromised. My question is, how confident are you in Georgia's election infrastructure? And do you know of any initiatives being put in place to ensure that it's secure?
Right. Well, I think we're all concerned, right? But I just said to the gentleman over here, we had several federal courts issue orders literally on the eve of the 2018 election. We weren't able to effectuate them in such short order, right? But now those orders are still in place, and they've dictated how we have to provide election facilities in this state, how we have to read signatures and absentee ballots that come in, right? And so a step was taken in the right direction. And then we've had the Republican legislature and the Republican governor signed into law, albeit, as I said, pretty milquetoast, pretty lukewarm, adjustments and improvements to our voting system, but that's a little step forward. Now we've got more lawsuits pending in the federal courts, and they may issue some orders, and if they do, that's a little bit more. And we've got those organizations that I was talking about that now have been created, and they're doing nothing but working to make sure voters are educated, that the registrar's offices are doing their very best jobs at predicting where there might be long lines and having enough voting machines and so forth. And so I am hopeful that when we go into 2020, I can tell you my campaign is going to have all kinds of resources out there making sure that people are voting and energized, and when they get to the polls, by God, their vote's going to count. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Speaking again of...
And then we got, I know you're over here, sir. I'm not going to forget you. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned 17 months.
Yeah. 17 months.
17
Oh,
months
the
until the
election.
next
Yes,
election.
yes.
But I get nervous because March 3rd, Georgia jumps in on the Super Tuesday.
Yes.
Is that just the presidential?
Yes.
Okay, that's just the
Yeah,
presidential.
it's such a good
That doesn't
question,
affect-
and as
how does
Democrats,
that affect your race?
yep. No, but you're so. This is really great. I mean, as Democrats, y'all need to know this because it's a big, big deal. We have Super Tuesday in March, but you're not going to vote for senator or congressman or whoever may be contested until May. Right now, it looks like May 19th. They haven't said it officially, but it looks like May 19th. So you've got to come out and vote for whoever you want to for president, right? On the Democratic ticket as a Democratic primary participant, and then you got to show back up. Now you know how hard it is to get people out for any dang election. Imagine trying to get them out twice in 2 months. So you're right on, it is a huge concern.
Are both
Yep.
senators, is Isaac
No,
senator?
he's not up until 2022. Yeah.
Who else has declared against you?
Nobody, there's two gentlemen who are sort of perennial, they kind of always file for everything, but then they just file and then they never file anything else. They haven't filed any of their required financial forms or any of that kind of stuff. So we're not taking anybody for granted, but you know. And so right now, I'm the only candidate in the field. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I know you have addressed the health care.
Yes.
But I would like for you to address the draining of the American people's pockets by pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And
You know,
what can be done.
thank you so much. That's actually something where I think I heard the Kaiser Foundation, Kaiser Family Foundation had a poll recently, and I think it was 61% of Republicans believed we needed reform related to pharmaceutical costs. And you know Democrats think we do, right? And so if we've got that kind of consensus, hey, diddle diddle, let's get something done, right? And so you're absolutely right. There are all sorts of things that we can do. First of all, we could let Medicaid and Medicare use their tremendous buying power to force down the costs, right? You know, Canada has a lot of great ideas of things that they have done related specifically to the cost of prescriptions. We want people to be able to take the costly research and development risk that they do to develop these awesome drugs that save people's lives. I mean, you know, you remember back when you were young, if a woman was diagnosed with breast cancer, that was pretty much it. And now how many women do you know that have been living 20-year survivors more, right? Perfectly healthy, and that's because, of course, of the research and development of drug companies. But we can help fund a lot of that research and development as the United States, and it's not a waste of our taxpayer dollars, it's an investment that returns to our people. And so yes, there's a lot of solutions and a lot of consensus around a fundamental restructuring of our pharmaceutical healthcare costs, particularly in how we can use the bargaining power of Medicare and Medicaid to help drive them down. And as I said, Canada has some pretty good ideas. It may not initially fit our system exactly, but we could tweak it and conceptually make it work. And so for the gentleman who's been so patient over here, yes, sir.
Yeah, what committees and caucuses would you seek to join if you're elected?
The Senate Armed Services Committee, given the fact that I am devoted to the 9 military facilities in this particular state and how interwoven it is with our military readiness and also with our economic development as a state, the jobs that are dependent, the regions that are dependent on those facilities. As I said, I have a national security secret clearance and have been briefed in those circles for the 8 years that I was the head of Homeland Security, not just for Columbus, but through mutual aid agreements, about 16 counties in southwest Georgia. And so that background is actually more than Senator Perdue had when he got his position on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And we've held that seat for a while. Chambliss held it, Cleveland held it, and none held it. So I would intend to hold it. And frankly, as the woman asked over here, I can't remember who asked it, but yes, you asked who else might be in the field on the Democrat. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else will be. I bet you'll be the only one holding national security secret clearance, and then you with any administrative experience on a military basis. So,
all right. Thank you so much.